Long-distance trade, key concepts. The goal of this is just to set out some of the basic ideas historians have in mind when they talk about long-distance trade, why we think it's important, what our basic preconceptions underlying it are. So it's a brief survey, like I said, of just some of the background ideas. When you look at the history of trade, long history of trade, probably the beginning of trade was as gifts, where one group or individual gave to another a gift with the expectation that there would be a gift given in return. And if you look at the really early states like First Kingdom, Egypt, early Mesopotamia, areas like that, there's evidence of gift giving where the ruler sends envoys, sends ambassadors to another ruler to give them gifts, and then the expectation is to give gifts back in exchange. And those gifts must be of the same amount or quality at least, or else it's going to be a sign that the second ruler is of lower status, and the lower status ruler therefore is going to be seen as a subordinate. So the assumption there is going to be an exchange of goods, and those were goods that could often be very useful, particularly to the rulers, but at the same time it was always talked about and thought about in the terms of gift giving, rather than what we'd identify as sort of profit, business-like aspects. Merchants emerge maybe by the 3rd millennium BCE, so a long time ago. And in this case, what you have are individuals or often families trading on their own behalf. And apparently, maybe some of this begins with those gift givers. So you're sent by Egypt, the pharaoh in Egypt, he has sent you off to Mesopotamia to give a gift to some rulers there and pick up their gifts in exchange maybe. But on the other hand, while you're there, you know that there's a lot of people back home who really like the cloth that is woven in Mesopotamia. So you buy a bunch of cloth and you take that cloth back with you along with the gifts that you're bringing back with you. And so you turn over the gifts to the king and he uses them as he needs to, but you also have that cloth you've brought back with you and that you sell. And so maybe that's where the beginning of trading merchants get going. But you do, from this very early period, begin to see the growth of this group of people trading on their own behalf, doing it with the goal of making profit. Really, really, really small percentage of society, only in areas like cities, but they are there. Long-distance trade, in the sense that we're talking about this week, is something that's focused on luxuries and status items. Okay, so we're not talking about local exchange where I grow an extra amount of grain so I can give some to my neighbor so I can get from them some cloth or some other kinds of goods that my neighbor has an excess of, or even from the next village over. Instead, we're talking about long-distance trade going from one society to another usually. And in that case, what we're really talking about are luxuries, status items, things that are generally not seen as essentials and often are not relevant to ordinary people. They have to be something that can be transported relatively easily. So cloth is good, spices are good, jewels are good, things that aren't going to rot easily, things that are transportable in terms of their relatively lightweight, things that are highly valuable, therefore you don't need to transport a huge amount of them to be able to get a profit out of it. Those are the kinds of things. These were not valuable to ordinary people, but they're not relevant to ordinary people. Ordinary people would still see them as valuable, but they're highly valuable to the elite, and they become an important part of their lives. More than that, the possession of these kinds of goods helps people maintain status. And one of the ways historically you maintain status is with your capability to give gifts. So if you are the ruler of a country, one of the ways in which you keep your nobility, the other important people in your society, attuned to you, in debt to you, basically dependent on you and therefore loyal to you, is you give them valuable gifts on a regular basis. So it's not just, we think of government in terms of taxes going in, but there's also this process of people getting benefits from government. In this case, the focus is on the elites and the kinds of gifts they're given. So you need to have those luxury items as the ruler in order to keep your nobles loyal to you by giving them these gifts. Similarly, if you're members of these elite, they have their own small economies within their households or within their various dependents or their allies where they do the same thing. You have valuable items both because you want to use them for yourself, but that you also need to be able to distribute them to others as a way of proving your status and proving that they need to stay loyal to you, to keep having access to those wonderful luxury items. Long-distance trade plays an important role in many cases in building up states and building up governments for a number of reasons. One important one is taxes. You look at certain kinds of areas like West Africa, control of a trade route is what's going to give the ruler power because they're able to tax, they're able to benefit from the trade that goes through that area, and that gives them the wealth that they build their government with. It's also important because it means that you as the ruler have control of high status items, that you have access to the things that you need to be able to distribute. It also, in various cases, gives the kind of wealth that governments need to build up armies. So you may have additional sources of power through the military, through that kind of power, power of force, but trade often is key in giving you the start, giving you the core that allows you to build up these other kinds of power. Trade itself, historically, you have to remember, nothing is mechanized. So if you travel via water or you travel via foot. And so centers of trade, the Mediterranean Sea, and you actually have societies that are focused on that trade. Ancient Greece, ancient Phoenicia, we talked about, which are really good examples of that. But even, for example, Rome, other societies traveling across the water, the Mediterranean, the Indian Ocean, traveling along rivers as a way of getting things, moving them quicker. If you don't have a river, if you don't have the option of water, then you're talking about caravans, groups of travelers traveling together for safety, often using horses, camels. A lot of times, by the way, you may actually be on foot because it's more important to use your camel or your horses or whatever other animal you're using to carry the goods that you're transporting because that's how you're going to make your money, than to make it easier for yourself by riding, depending on the time period and place. As time goes on, you also have efforts to build up things to make it easier. So the very beginnings of canals, basically artificial built rivers, roads being built, and that's really a sign of sort of advanced society. So that's one of the reasons we as historians make such a big deal about it. So Persian Empire had a very long road. The Grand Canal is built in China, and that's another sign of highly advanced development for them. So that begins to develop eventually. One other piece of all of this are nomads. When you're talking about travel that doesn't go across water, a lot of times that goes across deserts, grasslands, places without cities, without farming. And in those cases, it usually depends on nomads, people who are not settled, who don't have a single location where they live, that instead usually have a series of ranges that they travel over in terms of grazing with their animals, trading with other people, raiding, there's sort of a territory. Basically, they have a territory, they don't have a spot, a location like a city or a farm. Nomads live off their herd animals and with their herd animals, their horses, their camels, depending on the location. However, they usually also depend on the goods that come from settled peoples, even though they often don't look well upon settled people. They tend to see them as inferior. So the grain that they produce, the cloth that they produce, the iron that they produce, all those other kinds of goods are actually quite essential for a nomad's way of life. So on the one hand, nomads are independent, traveling in the desert, apart from farmers, apart from the settled way of life. On the other hand, they need those goods that are coming from those settled lands. Often they therefore encourage trade. They'll act as intermediaries, in other words, the middlemen. So early on in trade systems, it's not uncommon that you trade with the nomads next to you. If you're a farmer group, let's say you're in China, so you trade with the nomads next to you. The nomads next to you trade with the next set of nomads who trade with the next set of nomads who trade with the next set of nomads who maybe are trading with the settled farmers next to them. So those goods have made their way all along that chain, and then they'll reverse back through it. So they're the sort of middlemen to make the whole system work. As time goes on, when you have caravans, direct trading efforts, they're often the guides who lead the caravans, they're the guards who protect the caravans, and depending on the situation and their terms on which they are with the people who are in the caravans, they can be the bandits who attack the caravans. It really can go either way. And that's the situation between nomads and farmers in general. If times are good, they're trading with each other, and that's the times actually when goods flow the most evenly and greatest amount. But if trade breaks down for whatever reason, or is not acceptable for whatever reason, then they turn back to raiding. So those goods are going to move from the farmers to the nomads, but they're either going to do it through peaceful trade, or they're going to do it for violent raid. Or alternatively, they may do it from something in between, where a farming group of people will agree to pay a tribute. We'll give you each year so much grain, so much silk, and in exchange for that, you won't attack us. So there's various kinds of deals that can be made as well to facilitate that. For the nomads themselves, the wealth that comes from trade is an important part of allowing the leaders to gain status and power. Remember that bit about leaders being able to give gifts to their followers? It's a really critical thing for the nomads. So a nomadic leader who is involved in successful trade, successful raiding, is going to have the goods, the luxuries they need to build up their authority, to convince other nomadic groups to cooperate with them, to join with him, and may actually lead him to becoming a major military force, which in some cases can lead him on to being able to build an army of conquest. And we'll be talking about the Mongols next week, so you'll know more about that.